Welcome back to LexTalks, Legal Topics Simplified. We always try to make Indian law a little bit easier to understand, and especially for all you law students out there, we're tackling a big one today, mortgages.
A cornerstone of property law.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're really diving deep into this topic, specifically mortgage, meaning essentials and kinds of mortgage, under the Transfer of Property Act, 1882.
That's right. We're going to break it all down for you. What a mortgage is, why it even matters. You know how the different types actually work in the real world.
Okay, so before we get into the specifics of the Indian law here, can you just give us a basic definition, like in simple terms, what is a mortgage?
Okay, so a mortgage is basically a way for someone to borrow money, and they use their property as a kind of security.
Okay.
So it's not like selling your house to the bank.
Right.
You're giving them a conditional claim on the property.
I see.
So think of it like this. You know you're pledging your property as a guarantee to the lender that you'll repay the loan. If you don't repay it, they have the right to recover their money.
Okay, so it's kind of like a safety net for the lender, but with a lot of legal conditions for the borrower.
Exactly. And the Transfer of Property Act of 1882, or TPA as it's often called, lays out all the legal details very carefully. It defines a valid mortgage, and it outlines all the different types of mortgages that exist here in India.
And speaking of types, our research turned up a really interesting one called a mortgage by conditional sale. And it sounds almost like they're disguising a sale as a mortgage.
Yeah, this one is a little tricky. It trips a lot of people up. So imagine you need some money right away, and you agree to sell your land. But there's this clause. It lets you buy the land back once you repay the loan with interest.
Okay.
So on the surface, it looks like a sale, but legally it's considered a mortgage.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's really all about the fine print.
Yeah.
If there's that buyback option, it's probably a mortgage disguised as a sale.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there like a real-world example of that?
Oh, absolutely. There's a case, Ismail Karti versus Muljipai Brahmapat. That illustrates this perfectly. The document looked like just a regular sale at first, but when the court looked closer, they found this redemption clause. And that's what made it a mortgage by conditional sale.
Okay, so always got to read the fine print carefully, especially with property.
Always.
Now, to be a valid mortgage in the first place, are there certain essential criteria that it needs to meet?
Yeah, for sure. Section 58 of the TPA outlines all these essentials. So first off, you need two willing parties, the mortgager and the mortgagee.
Okay, and those are?
The mortgager is the one borrowing the money and offering their property as security, and the mortgagee is the lender.
Okay.
So just like any contract, you need a clear agreement between two parties.
Right. So what else is essential?
Well, the property itself is key. It has to be immovable property.
So like land or buildings?
Exactly. And it has to be specifically identified in the agreement.
Okay.
And then there's the mortgage money. That's the principal amount that's loaned plus interest. And most importantly, there needs to be a clear intention to create a security interest in the property.
So you can't just casually mention using your house as a guarantee. It has to be explicitly stated that this is a mortgage agreement.
Exactly. Cases like Sunil K. Sarkar v. Agor K. Basu, 1989, have highlighted this. There were separate documents for the sale and a potential buyback. And that caused a lot of confusion. The court ended up saying that it wasn't a mortgage by conditional sale because the essential elements weren't there.
Got it. So clarity and being specific are super important when it comes to mortgage agreements.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's move on to the different types of mortgages that are outlined in the TPA. I know there's more than one.
Yeah.
So let's start with the first one. What is it?
Let's start with the most basic type, the simple mortgage.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward, as the name suggests. The mortgager promises to repay the loan, and the lender, if the borrower doesn't pay back the loan, has the right to sell the property.
Okay.
But it has to go through a court process.
Okay, so the borrower is personally liable. Their liability is tied to that property. But why would somebody choose this type of mortgage?
You'd usually pick a simple mortgage when you want a very clear and uncomplicated agreement. And when you're pretty confident about your ability to repay on time, it avoids some of the complexities of the other types of mortgages.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like a basic IOU agreement with your property on the line. What about that usufructuary mortgage? That one sounded pretty interesting.
Yeah, this is where it gets more interesting. In a usufructuary mortgage, the lender, they don't just hold a claim on the property, they actually possess it and can use it until the loan is repaid. So they can collect rents, any profits from the property. Sometimes they even use the property themselves.
So the lender could actually move into my property or rent it out. That sounds a bit risky for the borrower.
It can be, but there are also some advantages. Imagine, a farmer needs a loan but can't afford to make regular interest payments. They might choose a usufructuary mortgage, and that would allow the lender to, cultivate the land and take the harvest until the principal is paid off.
Okay, so it's a way to make the loan work, even when regular payments are tough.
Hmm.
But yeah, I can see how it could also lead to some problems, especially if the lender isn't very careful with the property.
Yeah, you're right. There are potential downsides. That's why the TPA is very specific in laying out guidelines to protect both parties. So, for example, the lender isn't allowed to damage the property or use it in a way that would lower its value.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's kind of like a balancing act, with both benefits and risks for both sides.
Yeah.
So what other types of mortgages are there?
All right, I'm starting to get a sense of how these different mortgage types work, like how they fit different situations. But I think we have to talk about the English mortgage. It sounds very official. Yeah, an English mortgage is all about clarity, being straightforward. Basically, the mortgager transfers the property completely over to the mortgagee. But there's a condition. It has to be transferred back when the loan is completely repaid.
Okay, so it's like a temporary transfer of ownership,
Yeah,
but you're guaranteed to get your property back once you pay off the debt.
yeah.
Why would somebody go for this instead of just a simple mortgage?
Well, an English mortgage gives more security to the lender.
Okay.
Because they already have the title to the property, it streamlines the process if there's a default. And for the borrower, it might be good if they need a bigger loan or want to show they're serious about repaying.
Okay, so it's like a trade-off.
Hmm.
More security for the lender, and the borrower temporarily gives up full ownership. Okay, let's move on to equitable mortgage. The name makes it sound like it's more fair or flexible or something.
Yeah, you're right. Equitable mortgages are known for being simpler and faster. You don't need a formal mortgage deed. You just deposit the title deeds of your property with the lender. And this is really common in some specific towns.
Oh, so it's like a fast-track mortgage. Perfect for when you need a loan in a hurry. But is it still legally binding, even though there's no formal agreement?
Absolutely. It's still governed by the same laws. The lender's rights and the borrower's responsibilities are just as strong.
Okay, so just because it's called equitable doesn't mean it's casual or that it can't be enforced. It's still serious legally. All right, what about anomalous mortgage? That sounds a bit mysterious and
Yeah.
maybe even a little bit risky.
Yeah, anomalous mortgage is like the wild card of mortgages. It
Mhm.
basically combines elements from different mortgage types, so the terms of the contract are super important.
Oh, so it's like a custom mortgage. You can
Yeah.
tailor it to fit the situation. That sounds like it could get really complicated, though.
Yeah, for sure. You have to be really careful with the details. Both sides have to be clear on what features are included and how their rights and responsibilities are affected.
So if you're going for an anomalous mortgage, get yourself a good lawyer and a magnifying glass to read that contract. All right, so now that we've looked at all these types, let's talk about the rights and liabilities of both sides. The mortgager and the mortgagee.
Yeah, that's important. It's not just about the type of mortgage. It's about the legal framework that governs the relationship between the borrower and lender.
Right, so let's start with the borrower, the mortgager. What are their rights under the TPA?
One of the most basic rights is the right of redemption, which means they have the right to get their property back, free and clear once they fully repay the loan, with interest.
So it's like a built-in safety valve. So they're not permanently losing their property just because they used it as collateral.
Exactly. It's a crucial protection, no matter what type of mortgage it is. There are some conditions, timelines, and all that. But the main thing is the borrower gets their property back once they fulfill their payment obligations.
Okay, good to know. What about things like leasing or selling the property? Can a mortgager do that while the mortgage is still in effect?
Yeah, they can, but there's an important condition. Any lease or sale has to respect the mortgagee's rights.
So it's like saying to the new tenant or buyer, hey, you're getting this property, but just so you know, the lender still has a claim on it until the loan's paid back.
Exactly. The mortgagee's interest has to be recognized and protected, no matter what happens with the property.
Right, that makes sense. All right, let's switch sides and talk about the mortgagee, the lender. What are their main rights? How do they protect their investment?
Well, one of their primary rights is the right to foreclose.
Foreclosure. That sounds serious. What exactly does that mean?
Basically, it's the legal process where the mortgagee can take possession of the property
Okay.
and sell it.
Yeah.
If the mortgagor doesn't repay the loan, they do it to recover the outstanding amount.
Okay, so it's the ultimate consequence for the borrower if they don't make their payments.
Mhm.
But I'm guessing there are some safeguards to keep lenders from abusing that power.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Foreclosure is a big deal, legally speaking. It has multiple steps and a lot of safeguards built in. It's not a simple process for the lender, and the borrower has chances to fix the default before it gets to that point.
Okay, so the bank can't just show up and change the locks if I miss one payment.
No, no.
There's a whole process.
There's a specific process they have to follow,
Okay.
and it's designed to protect both parties.
All right, so foreclosure is serious business, but it follows a system that's meant to protect everyone.
Huh.
Now let's talk about liabilities. What are the mortgagor's main responsibilities?
Well, the most obvious one is to repay the mortgage on time, according to the mortgage deed.
Like those monthly payments.
Yeah.
Got to keep up with those. What happens if they miss a payment? Do they go straight to foreclosure?
Not always. Missing a payment is a problem for sure. But most lenders will try to work with the borrower to figure out a solution before they go to foreclosure. But if you keep missing payments or if you're not talking to the lender, that's when your property is at risk.
So communication is key. If the borrower is having money problems, they should talk to the lender.
Always better to be upfront than to let things get out of control.
Okay, good advice.
Hmm.
What other responsibilities does the mortgagor have, besides just making the payments?
They have to maintain the property. They have to keep it in good shape.
So no ignoring leaky faucets?
Exactly. If you neglect maintenance, the property loses value, and that affects the lender's security interest.
Right, that makes sense. The property is the collateral, so the borrower has to take care of it. What about the mortgagee? What are their responsibilities?
Well, one key thing is they have to act in good faith. They have to treat the mortgagor fairly. No hidden fees or taking advantage of the borrower.
So the lender has to be transparent
Yeah.
and ethical, just like the borrower.
Right. It's a relationship built on trust. And the law is there to protect both sides.
Okay, that's good to hear. What about foreclosure? Does the mortgagee have any specific responsibilities when they're doing that?
Yes, they have to follow the proper legal procedures. They can't just suddenly decide to seize and sell the property.
So there's a process. They can't just do whatever they want.
Right. Specific notices have to be given, timelines have to be followed. The borrower can even challenge the foreclosure legally.
Okay, so foreclosure is a serious process.
Yeah.
With rules to protect both the lender and the borrower.
Exactly. And within that framework, there are certain legal concepts that can come up, like tacking.
Tacking. That sounds interesting. What is that?
Okay, so let's say a mortgagee lends money to a mortgagor. Then later they give them another loan on the same property, basically a second mortgage.
So it's like taking out a second loan. But using the same property as collateral, what does tacking have to do with that?
If the mortgagor doesn't pay back either loan, the mortgagee can combine both debts when they're trying to recover their money through foreclosure.
So they can just add the debts together.
Yeah, it's called tacking. So
Right.
they make sure they get back all the money they lend, not just from one of the loans.
Wow. Okay. So that's something mortgagors need to know if they're taking out multiple loans on the same property.
Yeah, for sure. It all comes down to planning carefully and understanding the risks when you have multiple mortgages.
That's good to know. It's all about making informed decisions. Now, there's another concept I'm curious about. Subrogation. Sounds kind of like a legal superpower or something.
Well, it's not quite a superpower, but it does give certain parties the ability to step into someone else's shoes, legally speaking.
Okay, you've got my attention. How does subrogation work with mortgages?
Let's say a mortgagor defaults on their loan, and the mortgagee has to pay off any other debts or charges on the property to protect their own interest.
So they're cleaning up the mess the borrower left behind.
Exactly. That's where subrogation comes in. The mortgagee, because they paid off those debts, they can step into the shoes of those original creditors
Oh, wow.
and ask for that money back from the mortgagor.
So the mortgagee can claim the debts that the mortgagor owed.
Yeah, they take over those claims, so they're not stuck paying for someone else's mistakes.
That seems fair. It protects the lender in a complicated situation. Now, I'm curious. What if there are multiple mortgages on the same property? How does the law decide who gets paid back first? Or who gets to foreclose?
That's a great question, and that brings us to the idea of priority of mortgages, which is a topic for another deep dive.
Stay tuned, listeners. We'll be back to talk about what happens when there are multiple mortgages. And we'll discuss marshaling and the impact of registration. All right, welcome back to LexTalks, everyone. We're wrapping up our deep dive into mortgages today under the Transfer of Property Act of 1882.
And in this last part, we're going to tackle a question. What happens when you have multiple mortgages on the same property?
Yeah, so what if a property has not one but two mortgages?
Could even be more. This is where the idea of priority of mortgages becomes really important.
It's like a legal battle to the death. Which mortgage wins?
It can feel that way sometimes, but luckily the Transfer of Property Act has some rules to decide which mortgagee has the strongest claim to the property. So they get paid first if the borrower defaults.
Okay, so how does this mortgage showdown work? What are the rules?
The main rule is first in time, first in right. The first mortgage that was created usually takes priority over any later ones.
So whoever got there first, basically.
Exactly. Imagine a line at a food truck. The first person in line gets served first. Doesn't matter who shows up after.
That makes sense. But are there any exceptions to this first come, first served rule?
There are some. Like if a later mortgagee had no idea about an earlier mortgage when they gave out the loan and they were acting in good faith, they might actually get priority.
So sometimes not knowing can be a good thing. Legally speaking, at least.
In some cases, yeah. But they'd have to prove they didn't know about the first mortgage, and it's up to them to prove it. Lenders really need to do their research before giving out loans, make sure there aren't any other claims on the property.
Yeah, you don't want to end up at the back of the line because you didn't do your homework.
Exactly. And another thing that can change who has priority is registration.
Right. We've talked about registration before. What's the connection to priority?
Registering a mortgage is like you're making a public announcement. You're telling everyone, hey, I have a claim on this property, watch out.
Putting up a big warning sign.
Yeah. And here's where it gets interesting. If an earlier mortgage wasn't registered and a later mortgagee lends money without knowing about it, the registered mortgage will usually get priority.
Oh, wow. So registration really matters. It protects the lender's interests.
Definitely. It keeps things transparent and reduces disputes. It's good for lenders and good for the whole property market.
Okay, so registration is a key piece of the puzzle. It helps figure out who gets priority. But let's move on to another concept, marshaling. Sounds kind of like we're getting into military tactics now.
Well, it's a legal tactic. It comes up when a borrower has multiple properties, and different mortgagees have claims on those properties.
So we've got multiple properties and multiple mortgages. Sounds complicated.
Yeah, it can be. Let's say a borrower has two properties. We'll call them A and B. Mortgagee X has a claim on both properties, but Mortgagee Y only has a claim on property A.
Okay, got it.
Now, if Mortgagee X wants to enforce their mortgage and get their money back, marshaling says that Mortgagee Y can ask them to go after property B first, the one they don't have a claim on.
So they're like, hey, go after the property I'm not involved in. Leave my secured property alone.
Exactly. Marshaling is designed to protect the later mortgagees. It makes sure that earlier mortgagees don't unfairly go after properties where others have the only claim.
Makes sense. Trying to keep things fair for everyone.
Right. It's all about being fair and giving all the mortgagees a fair shot at recovering their money.
Okay, so we've covered priority, we've talked about marshaling, and we've seen how important registration is for protecting everyone's rights. What's the main takeaway here for our listeners, especially the law students?
Mortgages are complicated. There's a whole legal framework that governs them. You need to understand these concepts. Different types of mortgages, priority, registration, all of it. It's super important for anyone who deals with property transactions.
Knowledge is power. And for you law students, this knowledge will help you navigate property law and help your clients.
For sure. Whether you're analyzing a case, writing a document, or giving advice to a client, knowing mortgage law inside and out is really valuable.
All right, so there you have it, folks. We've gone through a lot, from what a mortgage is to the complexities of priority and foreclosure.
Hopefully it's been helpful and you all learned something new today.
I hope you found it interesting. And be sure to subscribe to LexTalks for more deep dives into Indian law. Until next time, keep learning.